Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report, and we have one of my favorite guests on from the LaRouche Foundation, Harley Schlanger, has been back now. Harley, we have lots of stories to touch on. What are the key ones for today?
Well, I think the thing that everyone has to start paying attention to is the war danger. And, just because we've been talking about this for a long time and there hasn't been nuclear war doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And what's occurred in the last 10 days, I was in Europe during part of this time, and then since I've been back, it's gotten worse, is that there's been an all-court press by Obama and British Prime Minister Cameron to escalate the sanctions against Russia, to carry out what one British writer called the nuclear financial mushroom clouds. And they're moving to the point of they think they'll choke Russia. Now, there are two aspects to this. One is it's not going to work against Russia because Russia is actually moving towards setting up a new financial system. And that's what the BRICS agenda is. We can talk about that a little bit later.
Right.
But that's why Russia's under attack, because they won't go along with the collapsing financial system. So Cameron this week went to Brussels after putting an op-ed in the Sunday Times the week before, and then sending a letter to all the heads of state of NATO saying that due to Russian aggression, NATO must change its policy towards Russia. Now, the first thing that anyone who's sane should ask is, what Russian aggression? Where is there any evidence of Russian aggression?
Yeah,
Secondly,
exactly.
he said, we need a rapid deployment force of 25,000 troops to be deployed into Eastern Europe. Third, we need to upgrade and resupply Eastern European nations. Fourth, we need to spend more money on defense in European nations. Now, most European nations are bankrupt. They don't have money to spend.
Where is this all coming from? I mean, why does he think he's a spokesperson for Europe? First, he's a spokesperson for the Queen and for the British Empire and the royal city of London. I call it Londonistan.
That's exactly the point, Dr. Deagle, that what you have in Cameron is that because Obama has not been effective in mobilizing Europe, Obama goes out there and makes a comment, and most of Europe looks at him like, who the hell is this guy? So Cameron is now coming out as the spokesman for the British Empire and essentially saying, either you guys go along with us or your economies will collapse. The British will let your economies collapse. These are hardcore threats. Now, the irony is that who will be affected the most by the sanctions against Russia? It's Germany. Germany's going to lose 200 to 300,000 jobs. France will lose 150,000 jobs. Italy's already lost 20,000 jobs just from the threat of the sanctions. Now, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, yesterday said that had there not been a fight going on in Ukraine, NATO would have caused a fight somewhere else because of their desire to turn on Russia. And he said there's an imaginary idea that Russia is somehow expansionist. And then he said, but which force in the world added 16 countries to it, namely NATO? NATO is expanding eastward. They did this before Ukraine.
Which is a violation of their primary directive, which is not to act as an invading force to squeeze or crush Russia or encircle it. Which would inflame
agreement made by George Bush and then by Clinton, George Bush Sr., and then Clinton as part of the negotiations after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Right, it wasn't decided to absorb this.
Saying we would not put NATO forces in Eastern Europe, and yet we're now resupplying countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Poland is getting 1,200 British forces. They're getting upgraded in jets and tanks. And all of this because the Russians stood up after the illegal coup against the government in Ukraine and demanded that the Russian ethnic populations in eastern Ukraine be protected against neo-Nazis who are running the government in Kiev.
Right.
Now, Bill, there's an interesting development in the last 48 hours on the MH17 flight, which is that the Malaysian government put out a statement saying until they see evidence that shows who definitively shot it down. They're not going to blame Russia because there's no evidence. Number two, they hold the government in Kiev responsible because it was the air traffic controllers in Kiev who gave the go-ahead for that plane to fly over the area, which was a war zone.
Right.
Now, this is being kept out of the U.S. press, where the U.S. press, we now have John Kerry doing his Colin Powell imitation and Obama doing his Bush and Cheney imitation, saying Putin did it, Putin's responsible. In Germany now, in France, there are stories saying that where are the satellite photos or the AWACS photos showing the Buk anti-missile systems or anti-aircraft systems in eastern Ukraine?
Right.
Where are the pictures showing the Russians moving them back into Russia? You know, we have surveillance that can pick up a dime falling out of someone's pocket in Donetsk. So how come we can't pick up movement of heavy artillery of this sort? And I'm telling you, what's going to happen is that...
Well, you know they can, actually. Please finish your statement, and I got something really important to say that's classified information that the public needs to know, and people listening in the government, because they compartmentalize the government and the military. People in one branch of the military and government don't know what the other branches know.
Well, and there's this article by Robert Parry, who's the guy who first uncovered the Iran-Contra story in Consortium News, and what Parry said is that his intelligence sources, and these include military intelligence, are saying that they think it was an accidental shooting from Ukrainian forces from the ground or possibly from Ukrainian jets that thought they might be shooting at Putin's plane.
Right, exactly. In fact, it's either one of those is actually the most valid and logical reason. And we know there's also collaboration with the Israelis, because the Israelis had access to intelligence, because people may or may not know this, that Israelis have direct access to intelligence not only in Russia and the Soviet Union, which I think still exists, and American intelligence. If you look at all the different departments of the U.S. government, you look at the top list of the intelligence and information gathering and even the phone companies, it's Israel. It's Israeli intelligence and information companies.
Well, you just saw the story. The Israelis had John Kerry's cell phone on their surveillance when Kerry was talking about what his talking points would be when he met with Netanyahu.
Oh, my.
Netanyahu knew what he was going to say before he got there.
Oh, my. Well, see, this is something people don't understand. If you look at the intelligence service for the National Security Agency, for the FBI and so on, the actual intelligence service that actually covers all of these is always Israeli. And by the way, the same thing goes on in the Soviet Union, too.
Between the NSA, the General Intelligence Headquarters in Britain, and Israel, there's so much sharing that it's not even as though they're separate intelligence agencies. They function as a one.
Exactly. Now, what people should understand is that one was conceived firstly in Nazi Germany before the Second World War, called Project Omega, and it was completed by George Bush Sr. in 1982. And its primary seat is at Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado, but it has nodes all over the world, from Britain to Australia to nodes in Russia. People don't understand this. They really don't understand the New World Order. The
American who put it together was Alan Dulles,
right,
who during the war was the OSS operator in Switzerland, who was coordinating the protection of key assets of Nazi intelligence and gold and resources, with the argument, in case they were caught, the argument would be, well, these were anti-communists who we would need after the war. The fact is that these were shared networks between British intelligence and what became the CIA. And these kinds of shared networks include today what is so-called Al-Qaeda, what is the Saudi network.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing.
There's a new book out on Lawrence of Arabia called Lawrence in Arabia, and it actually goes through how the British manipulated the whole situation in the Middle East during World War I, so that after the war, when the lines were drawn up of the countries, the British would be still in charge.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, it's all to the advantage of British and British transnational. Welcome back, and Harley, let's go through these other points we talked about on the break. Really important people understand that miscalculations rule the day and have throughout all history. These parties that are jockeying between two major systems, the BRIC systems which is real reason behind this danger of World War III, and the crazy bankers. And what I'm worried about, whatever compromise they come to in the end, may still be very noxious for everybody on Earth. But what they're willing to do is they're willing to actually go to the brink of a miscalculated and possibly launched World War III offensive. I mean, the dead hand maneuver was actually signed by Mr. Putin last Thursday. You were aware of that, right?
Yeah.
And that means that it's a launch-on-command automatic sequence for Russia if they detect any kind of movement indicating a nuclear strike on Russian territory or, quote, their allies. I think
only
that
a fool could look at what happened that created World War I and not recognize that we do face a danger of thermonuclear war today.
Yeah.
Because before World War I, no one thought it wasn't called World War I when it started. It looked like a skirmish between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and possibly Russia over the Balkans, or the British came in. But look, here's what people have to understand is that there have been two systems at war since the time of the American Revolution. One is the American system, which is based on the idea of a republic. And the key thing about a republic is that you have institutions of self-government in which the purpose of the government is to make sure that no private interest controls the system. That includes, at the time of the Revolution, it was the British East India Company. Today it's the mega banks and insurance companies and so on. Now, that system is an imperial system which believes in cheap labor, cheap raw materials, crushing sovereignty, having multinational institutions that are controlled by the bankers and corporations. Right. Now, that system is basically ruling the planet right now, but it's breaking apart because it's based on ideas that can't work. You cannot sustain that system with the debt buildup that comes out of it. And, when people forget that what we see as debt buildup, like government debt, and there's more private sector debt than government debt. There's consumer debt, personal debt, and so on, corporate debt. But that debt bubble is making some people rich, the people who trade the debt. And the people who trade the debt and trade the bonds, who are making a fortune, are the ones who are calling the shots. And they don't want to give that up. Now,
well, they actually want to superheat it even more. In fact, they want to create a new bubbles.
They have
because
to superheat
it. Right. If you don't superheat it, you actually can't maintain the super control, which is ultimately going to blow things apart to the point where you will have a time called the storming of the Bastille. Well, people don't understand that. That's coming.
Let's just stick on this financial thing for a second, because you're absolutely right. They not only superheat it, but there's no way in the world they could ever cover the debt. And they're willing to destroy nations and kill people in the process, because that's really their real intention. It's not these super rich, greedy people who control it, but it's the ones who have this idea historically of what it means to sustain an empire. Right. Now, one of the things that, and LaRouche has just emphasized, they cannot collect the debt, but they're going to keep trying. Now, we have in our Constitution and in our history a process of bankruptcy reorganization, which is the way you get out of a bubble. We didn't do it in 2008. There's a very prominent economist who lives in Switzerland named William White, who's the former chief economist for the Bank of International Settlements. And what he said is, in an interview he gave to a German publication, Focus Money, the other day, is he said the actors of the financial crisis, namely the British and Americans in particular, but also the EU, have indeed learned nothing from September 2008. Right. Now, here's his full quote. I just want you to listen to this, because I know it coheres with your thinking. White said, "I think that the cause of the financial crisis was an excessive policy of cheap money combined with new financial products, that is, derivatives and so on. This has led to a giant credit bubble, especially in the advanced economies. Since then, nothing has really changed. An active financial policy pumps the credit volume excessively like before. It does the same thing that unleashed the original disaster." And he goes on to say that the problem of indebtedness is ultimately a problem of solvency. People do not give money out if they fear that in the future they will not be able to service their debts.
Right.
But we should realistically admit that many debtors are practically broke and will never be able to carry their debts. Well, and so White concluded meaningful measures would be rescheduling, debt cuts, write-off of credits, recapitalization of banks. But these are not the tasks of a central bank, rather of governments. In other words, governments acting to defend their people have to put the financial institutions that created this excess indebtedness into bankruptcy reorganization. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's the government that's the main debtor. But in reality, private debt, bank debt, and corporate debt is much, much larger than government debt. And part of the growth in government debt is governments are trying to help these banks refinance by taking away from the future of the people of the country.
Well, they're contracting credit. See, one of the things that's particularly notable about 2008 and beyond, not just here but in China and elsewhere, is that there's a contraction of credit for small to medium to larger business.
Exactly.
And the only ones growing are the transnational corporations and the mega billionaires that are playing in derivatives, which basically knows that their creditors, the people that owe them money, can never pay it back, so they just build a bigger bubble.
And they look on their books liquid. But White always makes the distinction between solvency and liquidity.
Right.
Being liquid means you may have a lot of money sloshing around, but it's chasing after financial instruments that are worthless, which means essentially you're insolvent. Whereas a small regional bank that's got its money in local mom-and-pop shops and construction companies and small businesses and maybe some utility bonds and things of that sort doesn't have any liquidity because their credit has all been extended. But they actually are solvent in that they have a hope that it can be repaid, whereas the large banks have no hope that if there were a margin call, they could ever repay what's outstanding.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing.
So what is the government supposed to do? Now, this is the fight over Argentina, where the U.S. court system basically gave one vulture fund or two vulture funds the right to foreclose on a nation. And Argentina said, we're not going to let you do it. And most of the world has rallied to the defense of Argentina.
Right.
And now the judge in the case in New York, who's a corrupt, typical federal judge, is backing down from his initial ruling. So there's a lot going on, and I want to come back after the break. I know we have a break coming up. But this idea of the clash between two systems, what Americans have to realize is that for us to become a superpower again, we're going to have to break with this British Empire policy and work out cooperation with the countries that are moving out of our current system.
Well, otherwise we're going to be faced with hyperinflation and the dollar is going to physically collapse.
And war. And
they'll try to use up our people in war.
Global warming purports.
I was reading a little article back, and hour 3 today is going to be open lines, and get your questions ready to tell our board op Randy at GCN 800-259-5791. And every hour of the program, except the first hour Friday, is open lines 800-259-5791. You can call anywhere in the world to that number. The Ebola, I just want to summarize what's going on. The public policy is to create a crisis. Ebola is not easy to get unless you're extremely sloppy, don't have protective equipment, and someone literally is sitting beside you in the airliner and coughs blood and mucus on you. You're not likely to get Ebola. Ebola is 90% fatal if you get the darn thing, and they're experimenting on the people with various sera, including serum from people who, quote, survived Ebola or one genetically engineered tobacco, and I posted that article up today. The fact is that it has a 90% case fatality rate, but people say, well, it'll kill lots of people. No, it won't. If you have the proper isolation techniques, which means anybody flying even through an alternate route that comes from these countries, if their country of origin of their flight is from one of these countries that contains Ebola, they should be quarantined for 21 to 23 days, period. And if we had these policies in place and we tested everybody properly with sera initially and after so long, then we wouldn't have the problem, because it's not just stopping flights directly. And then secondly, our policies, we don't decontaminate aircraft when they fly in from foreign countries like China. It's only a matter of time before something much more deadly than Ebola comes that has a case fatality, say, of 5% or 10%, but it spreads 400 times more easily. So if someone coughs on the other side of the airport, you're going to get it. And that will kill many, many millions of times more people than Ebola. And the problem is, you see, these policies are put in place because they want medical martial law. They want an economic collapse so they can take all of your money with a bail-in while they're rearranging the world deck chairs.
A lot of people.
Right, and when they also want to rearrange the financial deck chairs so you don't have a bank account, you don't have equity in your home because they've blown out the dollar. Even though the mortgage rates are down, a lot of people are remortgaging because the mortgage rates have dropped. But the real fact is, it's not because the economy is doing so great, it's because it's doing so poorly. They've actually printed so many dollars that the actual dollar is deflated. So when you think, well, my mortgage rates have dropped a lot, that's because so has a lot of the equity in your home disappeared in your bank accounts. Every day you have money in the bank, it actually is going away. It's going bye-bye, see you later.
Well, I want to just let your listeners know that something happened this last week that was quite significant in Portugal, which is that the third largest bank in Portugal basically went belly up. And this was a 100 billion euro bank that was connected very directly to Crédit Agricole, which is the third largest bank in France. And so what happened with this is that they were going to do a bail-in. And at the last minute, they decided they couldn't do it because they were afraid of the effect that it would have Europe-wide. That is, once you start stealing people's deposits, how do you keep people to keep money in banks? So at the last minute, the government of Portugal came up with almost 5 billion euros to bail out a bank. Now, at the same time, a small bank in Austria, the Hypo Alpe Adria Bank, which actually was nationalized in 2009, collapsed again. And this time, it took 6 billion euros from the government to bail it out. Now, Austria's national budget is 70 billion. So almost 10% of their national budget now is going to go to bail out one relatively small bank. But what they did to bail out that bank is they also had a bail-in. And the bail-in was the bank had encouraged people to buy insurance policies with the bank after the 2009 collapse when it was first nationalized. So 250,000 depositors bought these insurance policies. The insurance policies were seized in the bank takeover. So people lost what they thought was life insurance that was connected to their deposits. So this was a bailout and a bail-in. Now, the reason I'm going through this is that this is also hitting Deutsche Bank. It's hitting every single big bank in Europe. It's hitting the big banks in the United States. And what we're seeing now is a total collapse in the process. Now, this collapse was supposed to be protected to some extent by taking bonds and other liquidity from Russia and China. But Russia and China said no. And so that's the importance of this BRICS operation, that the country, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have formed a new development bank, a $100 billion bank. Now, that's not enough to finance global development.
No.
But it's a start. It gives an alternative. And they said explicitly they will not do IMF-style conditionalities. And so now we're seeing the beginning of a potential to break from the bankrupt system. Now, that's when this has been occurring in the last month, that's when the go-ahead was given to Israel to go to war in Gaza, and that's when there was an escalation in Ukraine, and that's when Cameron came out saying to NATO countries, you have to spend more on defense and put troops on the border, and we've got to prepare for war with Russia. So that's why LaRouche has been absolutely right from the beginning when he said that the financial collapse and the war danger are interrelated. Now, the other thing that's interrelated is President Obama, who some people say he's detached, he's not really in it. He's totally in it. How do you think he got the whole Congress to vote support for resupplying Israel's Iron Dome? How do you think Obama says, oh, gee, it's too bad what's happening to the Palestinians, but the policy continues? Obama says, we tortured some folks, referring to this torture report, but then he allows Brennan to continue to redact it, and he won't fire Brennan, the CIA director who was spying on the Congress. So the starting point for getting out of this situation is you've got to get rid of Obama. Nothing else will work.
Exactly.
And I don't know if you saw this happened in the last 2 weeks. There was a bill called HCR 105, House Concurrent Resolution 105. And it was initiated by Barbara Lee, who's a left-wing African-American Democrat from Oakland, Jim McGovern, a progressive liberal Democrat from Massachusetts, and Walter Jones, a very conservative Republican from North Carolina. And what the bill said is that essentially that under the War Powers Act, if Obama sends troops to Iraq, this is a violation of the War Powers Act, and he cannot do it without coming to Congress. Now, the implication is if he tried to do it, he would be subject to impeachment by breaking the law. Here's what's interesting. 180 Democrats voted for it and 190 Republicans. So 370 votes to limit what Obama can do in Iraq. That is, to take away his power to unilaterally act. Now, unfortunately, the next day, 400 congressmen voted to resupply Israel and defend Israel against the Palestinians. So, and then the Congress went out of session without doing anything. So we're really at a point, we're in August. August is when wars often start. You probably saw we also just lost a very important general in Afghanistan to a terrorist attack. The ISIS, the Islamic State, is running wild in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and we're still giving money to them. So we're on the edge of a global war. And the question is, why are the American people letting the Congress go home to their districts when they should be in Washington impeaching Obama? And, Bill, let me just add one other thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
This is really important for people to hear. Republicans are getting grilled in their town meetings. Why aren't you going for impeachment? And here's their line. Number one, we don't have the votes in the Senate. And number two, impeachment is a Democratic talking point, so the Democrats can use it to rally their base and raise money. To that, I have a simple answer. If Obama's guilty of these crimes, let's get out and tell the truth. And it'll be very difficult for Democrats to try and raise money to defend a president who's systematically violating the Constitution and taking away the rights of every single American. Let's have the right kind of fight.
Exactly. In other words, they're trying to politic it rather than deal with the issues. Back, and we have a couple of callers, and remember, hour number 3 is going to be totally open lines. We'll talk about anything from geopolitical, spiritual, nutritional. We have Therese in Arizona. You had a quick questions. Go ahead. And then we have Glenn in Pennsylvania. Go ahead, Therese.
Yes, yep. Dr. Deagle. Well, you've got LaRouche with you, the LaRouche Foundation with you. I know that this drought that California is having is largely engineered, and they aren't releasing the water from the north. The high-pressure system's been created to the west, so everything's drying up. Today I saw where the UN is now recommending migrating people out of California, especially the San Joaquin Valley. This all falls in with Agenda 21.
Sure it does.
And I'm thinking of the Nawapa water plan.
Right.
It's a workable plan. Are they getting any more support for getting that plan put into place?
Go ahead, Harley, your comments.
Here's the problem. The state of California, until recently, was underplaying significantly the effects of the drought, and they were hoping that Obama would do something. And now it's become clear that Obama doesn't care. In fact, that Obama is part of the people who are willing to destroy the state of California. You know, the caller makes an important point, which is that, implicit in what she's asking, California, because of its industrial base, its advanced agriculture, its historic record of infrastructure that provided water, is a model for how to deal with areas that are not naturally fruitful. That is, that don't have ample water and agriculture. The state was turned into a near paradise. And this is a model for any part of the world. So to save it, which could be done with NWAPA, with what you're saying, releasing some of the water, at least as a short-term basis, desalination using nuclear power, other kinds of things. They're not doing any of it. They're saying there should be more conservation, and the caller's absolutely right. As of 2 days ago, there are reports that they're talking about, if not mandatory evacuation, at least encouraging large numbers of people to leave.
Yeah.
And so they're prepared to give up land that has proven to be some of the most productive in human history. And that's a crime. That actually shows the extent to which they are committed to genocide. And the Congress, just to answer your question on NWAPA, a lot of people say, well, it's a good idea, but it'll never happen. And we're at an era where the Congress reflects the short-sightedness and ignorance of the population. You know, that because we're not putting enough pressure on Congress to get rid of Obama, to go with Glass-Steagall, to go with NWAPA, the Congress is going with what Wall Street tells them to do, because that's where they get their money. And we've got to reverse that. We've got to have a population that fights for the traditional policies that made us a superpower.
Right. Now, the other thing that's going on is tied to the water issue is that, and this is published recently, I'm actually going to post the article in the news section of Nutrimedical, is that the overburden of water that they're not putting in increases the risk tremendously of an earthquake in California. And people should be aware that this is going on. There's a blocking high. I know I hear people that scoff, oh, come on, Deagle, another Deagleism. They're controlling the weather. There's no such thing as normal weather on this planet. And by the way, this is not open for people's opinion on this. There's some things that they have a right to an opinion on this issue. When I say that I had first-hand evidence taking care of the pilots flying out of Peterson and Buckley, first-hand evidence talking to Dr. Isley, who set up the World Constituent Parliament Association under the United Nations, and I received the Federation of Earth documents directly from him. Spent an entire evening talking about geoengineering back in 1997. This isn't open for anybody's opinion. It just is. The fact is there are no radioactive storms coming in from the North Pacific because they know if people got acutely ill, you'd have a massive revolt in America of people getting nosebleeds and diarrhea and acute radiation sickness. Right now we're getting a slow burn, and we have the first radiation test site for gamma testing. My computer actually is operational. I have a separate computer set up to report that in Vista, California. Luckily, it's relatively stable because we're not letting any weather systems move in from the north. They're only coming in from monsoons, which are just fine. And by the way, the radiation isn't just striking the West Coast. It's primarily striking the Canadian-U.S. border, heading over the Rocky Mountains and going down to the Midwest and Northeast, and then across the Atlantic Ocean. So when people get all panicky about the West Coast, they want a West Coast crisis. They're begging for it. They want an earthquake. They'd like to see God knows what else. And, of course, because Texas is going to do something about their border, and Governor Jerry Brown is in la-la land, we're not talking about the humanitarian aid, which I agree with totally, for these children that are refugees, but if 80%, I'm not sure what the number is, but if 80% or 60% are teenagers that are being told in the media, if you go north, you can go get a job even if you're a gang member or you got MS-13 tags on you, this isn't rational. I think what we should do is we should assess what's going on in these countries, including our need for their illegal drugs, and clean out the drug gangs, allow them to have industry, and make sure we even help build homes like Habitat for Humanity. But this idea that we want to bring everybody from a poor country to our country automatically is insane. Let's clean up their countries by helping their policies and bringing in our special ability to clean out rats' nests like an exterminator. The same way we fix up the rat's nest of Israel and the surrounding Muslim nations are ready to kill each other. We could fix that tomorrow if we decided to, instead of just amping up the war. We found out the director of ISIS is actually a Mossad agent. And we talked about this yesterday. We have actually the proof from Tim Alexander's blog. What people need to understand is what's really going on is the dialectic of conflict and war only advances the ledger books of bankers.
Well, and the agenda of the globalists. And what I'd like to do, and I thank you for the question, Teresa, I'd like to give out our phone number because we're still coordinating as the Congress is in the district, in their home districts. We're coordinating nationally a storming of these town meetings to force the Congress to face the fact that they're cowardly and they're not going after Obama. Right. So let me give the number that people can call. Actually, I'm going to give the National Center number because our number's changed and I don't have it right now.
Well, you're done with the 800-922-2907.
7566.
Let's repeat that.
That's the LaRouche PAC number, 800-929-7566. And just say that you heard about impeaching Obama on the Dr. Deagle show and you'd like to get involved. So it's 800-929-7566.
Yeah, and we have another caller now too, Glenn in Pennsylvania. Glenn, you had a question about Ebola. What's your question?
Yes, hello, Dr. Bill. Hello, Mr. Schreiner. I would like to suggest that just as Y2K functioned as a trial balloon group psychology learning lab for 9/11, which was on the drawing board at that time, that the current Ebola circus is functioning as a trial balloon learning lab group psychology study for the nation's response and the world's responses to bio threats. Ebola is good; it could be deadly, but as you said, it's nowhere near as deadly as the flu.
Oh no, it's a test. It's a test of the systems of how much the governments and the public will be manipulated into shots, drugs, even genetically engineered tobacco originated, which I posted yesterday. I posted today, actually. Today's show archives will be posting that news article. Tobacco-associated sera, genetically engineered. What people need to understand is that they want control of your body. They want control of your mind. They want every one of the divots of your bank account and any equity you have in their supercomputer. They don't want you to have to use anything other than biometric authentication to be able to buy, sell, eat, travel, or do anything. And people don't see this totalitarian regime coming, which I think is going to be a collective between the BRICS nations and the so-called New World Order British banking system. I think that whatever compromise is coming, it's going to be awful, and it won't last. It won't last. It will last for a few years, and then it'll fly apart in what I call the Great War, which is coming. Because the economic phase of World War III has already happened. The biological phase, Ebola, we have U.S. military patents for Ebola. You don't get issued a patent unless you invent or recreate a virus. This is a U.S. patent. Pretty nasty, isn't it? What do you think, Harley?
Well, I'd like to talk to you more about BRICS because I actually see a positive potential out of that. But
oh yeah, in terms of I see a positive too. But they need to use the positive factors there. Right now, it's the miscalculations could be disastrous.
Well, and that's why we've got to break the power of the British Empire. And get the United States back to being a superpower on our traditional basis.
Well, if we just act the way America does, which is ethical, innovative, and collaborative, we will be that superpower again without the British banks yoking us.
That's the key.
That's the key. Those articles are amazing. And check out the LaRouche websites, LaRouchePAC.com, LaRouchePUB.com, and that number I'm going to give out again is the National Impeach Obama, number 800-929-7566. Thanks, Arnie. Amazing show. Hour 3 is going to be wide open lines. 800-922-2907 is their other number. See you next week. Our number, 800-259-5791. We'll be back in just a moment with Hour 2.